How we doing? Are we well? Okay. So, guys, today we are, I think, going to probably finish the notes. Okay. So that means test. We're going to test Thursday and Friday, okay? And yeah, we talked about this last week.
Well, you talked about it.
Okay, listen. I assume you watch every video so that what is said during class is fair game. That's the rule. Okay, so test Thursday and Friday. And if you are helping with freshman retreat, you can take it Wednesday, set something up if you want, or you can come in Tuesday. Remember, Monday is President's Day, so Tuesday is Monday. Tuesday is your Monday, okay? You can take it early Wednesday, or I would say come in at lunch on Tuesday. No. I will talk about it. Pen. Okay. Switching it up a little bit. Okay. So let us continue here. Again, we are looking at the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, the impact on ordinary Americans, the impact on farmers, and what Hoover is willing to do and not willing to do. Yes? And that's kind of what we've been doing. So last thing we left off with was this slide here. Okay, he was worried about giving aid directly to the American people. Okay, this will be the last presidential administration that is the case. And then everything changes from there. 1930, worst drought. That will extend, guys, through like 35. 35 is probably the worst year, the Dust Bowl. And you see Congress voting money to help farmers feed their animals, their livestock, but not giving money directly to farmers. They will allow loans to farmers, but not direct aid. Okay. And the idea here, of course, is if you can keep the livestock alive, then the people have something to eat. Yes. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go across the pond. We're doing some foreign policy here. Basically, most of what we have left is foreign policy. Okay. Hoover's administration is going to pretty much end in failure as far as the Depression goes, and he's going to lose in 32 to Roosevelt. But before that, we're going to go back to Coolidge for a little bit, back to 1928, and what becomes known as the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Okay. Really, the foreign affairs that we've talked about to this point, the Five Power Treaty, which limited the size of countries' navies, which is disarming, which would hopefully prevent future wars. This is similar to the Five Power Treaty, except this is going to include 60 nations. Now, this is the idea of the French Foreign Minister Aristide Briand. Okay, now Briand comes up with this idea to prevent war from happening again. And some members of Congress invite him to give a speech in front of both houses of Congress, to a joint session of Congress. And Briand pitches this idea. The American Secretary of State, Frank Kellogg, and Coolidge were not really keen on this idea, but members of Congress were, and the American people were struck by this as a good idea. Okay, and so they kind of felt pressure to go along with this, which sounds really good, right? I mean, a promise of 60 of the world's greatest nations to renounce war as an instrument of their national policy in relations with one another, except when it comes to defense. Obviously, you would be able to defend yourself if you were attacked. So basically what they're doing, guys, here, if you renounce war, promise not to attack anybody else, basically you're making an agreement to outlaw war. This is 1928, August 27th. Now, why is this not a day we remember, where the world got together, held hands, sang Kumbaya, and said, we are going to outlaw war on this planet? Sam?
It didn't work.
It didn't work. I wonder why. Oh, you're saying there's no way to enforce this? So like if one of these countries that signs this says they're not going to go to war, and say, let's just say it's Japan, and then Japan attacks China, the other 59 countries are not going to go to war with Japan? That's kind of what you're saying? Yeah, that's what's the case. Okay, it's a piece of paper. That's all it is. It's a piece of paper. There's nothing binding here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's kind of like the Paris Accords. If you've been paying attention to what's going on with that, President Trump removed us from the Paris Accords, which is an environmental agreement across the world, okay, that is not binding on any country. It's a feel-good statement to say that we joined the Paris Accords and we're going to limit our carbon emissions. Well, we're already doing that. The United States has lowered carbon emissions better than any other country in the world. Is it holding China and India, their feet to the fire? Guys, these agreements are a joke. This is a joke. But what it's going to give you is a false sense of security. It may make you feel warm and fuzzy inside to say that you're doing something good for humanity. But you've also got to be realistic, guys. There are evil people in this world that don't care about this piece of paper. Okay? So this really relies solely on a moral force of world opinion. Okay? If the Japanese want to grow into a great empire like they do, and they're going to attack other countries to get natural resources and gain more power, then that's what they're going to do. No piece of paper is going to stop it. Okay? If China wants to pollute so that it can compete with the United States economically, India, same thing. If they want to compete on a world scale and they want to pollute, the Paris Accords are not going to stop them from polluting. Okay? So what this allows us to do, guys, and if you study this, you'll see that a lot of historians look back at this and just talk about how naive it is. This isn't just Mr. Ebright, okay? This is naive to think this is actually going to work, okay? But what it does, it allows us to retreat. Now, guys, if you think about us economically already, we're isolating ourselves with tariffs, yes? We have put tariffs on so many goods, especially Holy Smooth. We are isolating the United States from the rest of the world economically. Now, when we sign this treaty and have a false sense of security in it, then we can say to ourselves, look, everybody signed this document. We don't have to worry about war anymore. Okay, so it allows us to isolate ourselves politically as well. All right, which is what some people want, especially the Republican Party back then. You go back to the 1920s and 30s, the Republican Party really was an isolationist party. Yeah. Well, isolation economically, I think with tariffs, kind of showed us it was a mistake. You know what I mean? And then politically, militarily, this is the huge difference between the years after World War I and the years after World War II, the world that we live in today. After World War I, people said, well, if we stay out of other people's business, we isolate ourselves, then we won't get dragged into another war. Okay? After World War II, we said, if we're active and we participate in the world and we promote democracy, we promote freedom, we promote capitalism around the world, then the world will be a safer place. So we got involved in everybody's business after World War II. Have we had a third World War? We had 2 world wars in the span of 20 years. You know what I mean? 21 years. We haven't had one since. I mean, this is part of what we're studying this whole semester is the impact of the United States on the rest of the world is a huge part of the 20th century history. Yeah.
So is the desire for isolation like only a United States thing, or did other countries
Oh, no, I mean, if you look at countries like Japan, remember when we were trying to open up trade in the Far East? I don't know if you remember studying that last year. There, you know, the Chinese were very resistant to it. The Japanese very resistant. You look, we, although we're at times been an isolationist country, our immigration system is like, I mean, look at how many people from all over the world live in the United States. Go to Japan or go to China and see how many people from other countries live in those countries. I mean, there are, but like, you know what I mean? The United States is the most diverse. You know, you go to Europe and it's pretty diverse as well. But yeah, I mean, there are, you know, after Vietnam, you know, there was a lot of people's like, we don't need to get involved. This can get us in these wars. And then you look at Afghanistan and all our involvement in the Middle East since you guys have been alive. So yeah, there are times when people kind of push back toward this idea of isolationism. Okay, this is a major thing, guys. This isolationism during this time between the wars. Okay, so this leads to an isolationist policy, which really wasn't a problem during the 1920s when things were relatively calm in the world and relatively prosperous in the world. But by the time we hit the 1930s, our leadership in the world as a powerful nation is kind of needed. And we're just going to ignore events overseas. We're not going to get involved. Okay, and this pact really allows us, gives us an excuse to be able to do that. It gives us a false sense of security. Okay, so the United States is not going to lead economically nor politically during this time period, and the world is going to turn in, you know, it's going to turn into flames. Europe is going to be at war, Asia is going to be at war, and we're going to be sitting comfortably over on the other side of the Atlantic and the other side of the Pacific, just saying we're not getting involved, even though millions of people are being slaughtered all over the world. Millions, tens of millions. We will sit on the sidelines until finally it comes knocking on our door. The other approach is, hey, if we see bad things starting to happen, maybe we can extinguish those fires before they become infernos. You know what I mean? This is a, you know, and this is the future of this country, guys. I got a buddy of mine, we're talking about Taiwan. Remember how we talked about, I don't know if you remember, this is the first week of school, how we have pledged to defend Taiwan from China? And during the first week of the Biden administration, China's been violating Taiwanese airspace time and time again. The United States thus far has been quiet about it. So my buddy's pretty sure that they're going to try. They're going to make it. They're going to make it go for Taiwan, China. I don't know if I believe that, but what do? I mean, if we don't defend Taiwan, how does that make Japan and the Philippines and Australia and our other allies, South Korea, in the Asia Pacific? That makes them less secure. We have been security for Europe and Asia for 70 years. The United States has, with our tax dollars. Yours and my tax dollars, your parents' tax dollars. We've been paying for that. We have the strongest military in the world. Yeah.
How likely is it that, like, we're still going to get someone declaring war on Taiwan, or like at least attacking it, and then America not going through with defending it until like something really big happens and we can't ignore it anymore?
Well, the really big thing would be what, amphibious landing of Chinese troops on the island of Taiwan? I don't know which. I mean, what are you waiting for?
More about like they invade Taiwan, they go over Taiwan, and then they start using Taiwan as a military base.
Well, of course they will.
So like at that point we'll be attacked.
I think you either attack right at the beginning or you don't attack at all. I mean, why would you let them get a foothold? You know what I mean? You just stop them before they can do it. Like the Battle of Britain, which we'll cover later. All right, so. Yeah, guys, on this, just, again, there's no way to enforce this policy, okay? I might ask you to write a little bit about this on the test, okay? So you guys get a pretty good idea what it was. 60 countries basically trying to outlaw war, okay? All right, 1922, I let this one out of the bag earlier. The Five Power Treaty, when Mussolini came to power in Italy, fascist Italy, created fascist Italy. France, because of their neighbor Italy, violated the Five Power Treaty. We talked about how France would be the first one to violate, okay? And that is for their own safety and protection, okay? All right, so the Kellogg-Briand Pact would have little or no, I would say, positive effect. I think there are some negative effects to this, other than it making us feel good about ourselves signing this document. Okay. This is actually a picture of the signing ceremony. Calvin Coolidge signing on here. Okay. To the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Again, Coolidge and Kellogg were not really something they thought we should do, but Congress did. A lot of the American people did. So we went on with it. I know you guys have been wondering, really since we started this chapter. Mr. Ebright, what's going on in Latin America during this time period, right? I mean, that's kind of show you that you've been wondering that, right?
Yeah, I love a book.
You want one too?
Wow. How else am I supposed to?
What's that? Everything you need is in the notes, but here's a book. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Ashley, you were wondering what was going on in Latin America, right?
Of course.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Okay. So Coolidge. Good. American businesses, American industry have long invested in other countries, okay? And especially in the Caribbean and Latin America, okay? Some of this is oil exploration, some of this is sugar, fruit plantations, and so forth, okay? Cuba, we built hotels and casinos and so forth. So, what generally ended up happening, if our American business interests were threatened in those countries, our answer was usually send in the Marines to protect American interests. Okay. Now, we did this in the Dominican Republic a couple times. We did this in Nicaragua, helping to promote friendly governments to the United States as well. Now, with this action, guys, the United States tends to get a reputation as being a bully in the neighborhood, okay? I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. Yeah, I'll come right back, okay? So this map shows you some American interventions, 1898 to basically 1917, okay? You'll see different interventions by the United States, okay? And so we kind of get this back, this rap that we're a bully in the neighborhood, okay? With Mexico, I mean, we had the Mexican War in 1846 to 1848. Since then, our relations were generally good. You had the whole thing with Pancho Villa and chasing that guy around. But Mexico had asked American oil companies to come down and help them explore for oil in Mexico. And I don't know if you know this, guys. There is quite a bit of oil in Mexico. All right. It's a pretty big oil producing country. So the United States company like Standard Oil goes down there, helps them explore for the oil, find the oil, drill for the oil, and extract the oil, and then show them how to refine the oil into different oil-based products, like gasoline. Okay? And then in 1917, the Mexican government said, hey, thank you, Standard Oil, Texaco Oil. Thanks for finding, drilling, extracting the oil for us. We'll take over now. Now, American companies had bought that land and bought the mineral rights, and the Mexican government declared all oil deposits now belong to the government. Now, normally what the United States would have done was send in the Marines, okay? But in this case, we're not going to, okay? When the Mexico actually enforced this expropriation, they didn't enforce it in 1917. 1925 is when they actually did it, and confiscating American property. Well, guys, by 1925, guys, the United States has fallen into this mindset of isolationism. So we're not going to send in the Marines, okay, to Mexico. What we will do is boycott a lot of Mexican products, okay, as will Britain. Okay, and this is a day that I think is still celebrated to some extent in Mexico. The Expropiación Petrolera. Pretty good. Yeah. Fiestas Patrias of Mexico, where Lázaro Cárdenas declared that oil reserves of Mexican soil belong to the nation, following the principle stated in Article 27 of the Constitution of Mexico. This measure caused an international boycott of Mexican products the following years, especially by the United States, Britain, and the Netherlands. Okay. Eventually, we passed a peaceful settlement with Mexico. Okay. So that's Coolidge in Latin America. And then you get Hoover. Okay. Hoover's elected in 1928, takes office in 29. And his Secretary of State is not Kellogg, but Henry Stimson. And what we see with Stimson, guys, is working to improve relations with Latin America and the Stimson Doctrine. Okay, the Stimson Doctrine, which mirrors the Monroe Doctrine. And I know you guys all remember the Monroe Doctrine from last year. Lily does. Can you tell the class what you remember? No. Sam, Monroe Doctrine?
Must not declare war that does not bother anyone.
Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? Come on, son. Cooper?
I'm not leaving everybody alone except if they're attacked.
Okay. We're saying to Europe, stay out of our hemisphere. We'll stay out of your hemisphere, you stay out of our hemisphere. That's the Monroe Doctrine, okay? Now, what the Stimson Doctrine says is to Latin America. I know we've been a bully, pushed our weight around, gotten involved in your business. We're not going to do that anymore, okay? We're going to be nice. And we are going to allow you to control your own countries and destiny. Unless American lives are at stake, we will not get involved. Yeah. Henry Stimson is the Secretary of State under Hoover. Okay? So, Now, this is a pretty good idea, actually, guys. We want, we don't want people in our hemisphere to hate us, right? Strategically, listen, guys, we're a two-ocean nation. If everybody in our hemisphere is our friend, then we never have to worry about an invasion of our country unless it comes from across an ocean. Does that make sense? Yeah, it makes sense to Stimson. And then when Roosevelt's elected president, he's going to double down with what he calls the good neighbor policy. Okay, so there's really an effort to rebuild our reputation in Latin America, okay, and not get involved in their business so they don't hate us. Okay, remember the Zimmerman telegram where, the Germans are trying to get Mexico to attack the United States? We don't want that, okay? And this actually pays huge dividends during World War II, guys, knowing that everybody in our hemispheres is an ally. Now, when it's all said and done during World War II, every single nation in the Western Hemisphere declared war on the Axis power. Argentina was the last. They were kind of pro-fascist, and then they saw we were going to win, and so they declared war on the Axis power. Okay. So this is smart foreign policy by Stimson and later Roosevelt. Okay. So we're going to accept South American political life, whether we like it or not. We'll only get involved where American lives are at stake. We have no right to intervene. Now, it's now 2021. Have we violated this since then? Yeah, just a few times. All right, so what's expropriation? It's when government confiscates private property. Okay? So you got Veracruz, Mexico, you got Cuba, Haiti, Dominican, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Nicaragua, Panama. Okay? What? Oh, that's the U.S. over here. Isn't that funny? Okay. All right, here we go. More foreign policy. All right, so the decade of peace, the 1920s, is coming to an end, guys. The decade of prosperity for many, the 1920s, is coming to an end. I think I've probably alluded to this a couple of times. Okay, let's orient ourselves with this map. Here's the island of Japan. Okay, now, back around the turn of the century, there was a war between Russia and Japan called the Russo-Japanese War. Okay, at the conclusion of that war, the Japanese maintained control of this peninsula right here called Korea. Okay, so for the Korean people, the Japanese had control over their country from 1903 to 1945, when World War II ends. Okay, so Koreans, Japanese really haven't forgotten about that. You know what I mean? Now, if any guys are friends with Adney, Shin, okay, Minju Shin, okay, she is South Korean. Okay, so you could ask how their people feel about Japan. Now, it's not bad today, you know what I mean? But their ancestors remember. So what's going to happen in 1931 is the Japanese are going to create a crisis at the border between Korea and China and use that as an excuse to invade. Okay? This region of China, this is part of China, it's called Manchuria. Okay? The Japanese are going to take it over and create a puppet state and rename it Manchukuo. Manchuria, Manchukuo. You ready? Manchuria, Manchukuo. All right. Now, this will be violent. Okay. And you guys know what a puppet state is? Okay, so basically what the Japanese will do is keep some of the Chinese there in power, but use them as a puppet. Okay. One way of saying this is like they feed them wine, women, riches, and they do what you tell them to do. Okay. Now, there's a pretty good movie on this called The Last Emperor. The Last Emperor of Japan, or excuse me, of China. Okay. And it shows how the Japanese controlled him and so forth. Okay. And controlled Manchuria. Now, as you can see, guys, as the decade of the 1930s goes on, 1932, 33, 34, all the way through 1941, the Japanese are going to go further and further into China. Okay. And eventually they will take Shanghai, they will take Peking, they will take Nanking, and this will happen later. This is like 1941 down here. Okay. But this is through the decade of the 30s. All right. Now, guys, the Japanese here had signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact. You know, the one that we just talked about that they signed and said they would not use war unless it's for defense, right? Basically. So that was 1928. This is 1931. So the Kellogg-Briand Pact worked for 3 years. And people are shocked by what the Japanese have done here. Okay, but what are they going to do about it? Now, there is this international organization at the time. What's the name of that international organization? The League of Nations. Now, the United States isn't part of that, right? We didn't join that. Because the United States Senate has to approve treaties. We know that, right? The United States Senate voted 82-13. No, we're not joining the League of Nations. Okay? So the League of Nations still exists. What are they going to do about this? No, they're not. Nobody's declaring war. Nobody wants to go to war. Who's going to stop the Japanese? Okay, they're going to try. Yeah. But they won't stop them. So who's going to help China? No.
Australia.
No.
No.
Nobody's helping China. Nobody's going to help Ethiopia. Nobody's going to help Austria. Nobody's going to help the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia. Yeah, nobody's helping. Nobody's going to help Albania. When all of these countries were attacked during the 1930s, nobody's coming to their aid. Okay, now, the League of Nations, you know what they're going to do? Well, we'll send an observer, American observer. This will be up here for a while, so you can listen. To attend the League of Nations, and they invoked the Kellogg-Briand Pact and outlawed Japan. Yeah, they outlawed Japan. It's over for Japan. They've been outlawed. What does that mean?
In the eyes of who?
Do that would be America.
You can't outlaw them. They're a country. They're on the warpath. This is outlawing them from what? Now, at the League of Nations, Japan was there. They had a delegation there. They all had ambassadors. The Japanese delegation is sitting there, and the rest of the countries are saying, this is wrong. You guys shouldn't be doing this. And you signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, and you violated it. So everybody's talking, well, what do we do? What do we do? Well, let's outlaw them. What does that mean? I don't know. It sounds good. So the Japanese close up their papers, and there's video of this. Their delegation stands up, dead silence, walks out of the room at the League of Nations. The League of Nations doesn't have a military. They don't have tanks. They don't have an air force. Just like the United Nations, guys. The United Nations doesn't have tanks. It's not a military alliance. It's a peace alliance. Yeah.
Does America supply like 70% of the peace alliance?
For peacekeepers for the United Nations,
Yeah.
I don't know if that number's correct, 70%, but it wouldn't surprise me. We probably pay for 70% of the funding for the United Nations. I know we spend more than anybody else on your tax dollars and money. So, Stimson, Secretary of State, he wants sanctions. You guys know what sanctions are? Economic sanctions? It's like, we have these right now on Iran. So, like, we do not trade with Iran. Remember, we don't buy Cuban cigars from Cuba because we reject their government. So we're not going to trade with you. So we do this with countries that, like North Korea, we have sanctions against them. Okay, it hurts them. It hurts their government, and it generally hurts their people as well, which is not always our aim. Because generally, it's not the people that are our enemy; it's their governments. But it's one way to weaken their government is economic sanctions. So Hoover says no. Okay, why? Because if we started cutting off trade with Japan, that may cause a conflict. And what are we trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid a conflict. So guys, the world is going to sit around and watch this take place, and millions of Chinese are going to be killed. Okay? The rest of the world will sit on their hands and do nothing. Okay? People didn't want war, and they were worried about their own problems. Now I'm going to talk about two more movies before I run out of time here, because these are really good and show you kind of what was going on during this time period. Okay, and then I'm going to offer you a book to read for this class that is not American history. The only one I'm going to let you read, and you may not want to read it, but I've had students read it. And this is called a book called The Rape of Nanking. And then there's a movie called The Rape of Nanking. When the Japanese went into Nanking, the Chinese, you said, who's going to stop them? The Chinese tried to stop them. This is a city of around 300,000 people. The Chinese military will end up having to retreat. And the Japanese were led by a general named Prince Yasuhiko Asaka. And basically the order was to rape and pillage Nanking. There were over roughly 250,000 civilians in Nanking that were murdered by the Japanese. And if you were a woman in the city of Nanking, there was a very good chance that before you were murdered, you were raped. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. And this went for girls as well. The Japanese behavior here is one of the most disgusting, deplorable acts of evil that this planet has ever seen. The rape of Nanking. 250,000 civilians murdered. You get it? This is brutality on a scale that is almost indescribable. I'm sorry?
You say we can use this for the book review?
There, you can use this for the book review. It's called The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang. I had a student read it last semester. Actually, I think I might have two. Now, it's hard to read. Now, looking at bias, Iris Chang is Chinese. Okay? So she's writing this from a Chinese perspective. Now, there's a pretty good Hollywood movie, and I think it's on Amazon Prime right now, called The War of the Flowers. You guys all know who Christian Bale is? Okay, Batman, whatever, right? There's been like 10 Batmans, but Christian Bale plays this, he's a Catholic priest. He's He's not a Catholic priest. He's a undertaker, okay, or a quarter type guy, okay. Now in China, guys, and when I went to China, I was very surprised. I saw Catholic churches in China, like from 100 years ago. I was like, that's really interesting to see a Catholic church in China. You know what I mean? Just based on what I know about China. It's a historical thing, And guys, in Nanking, the same story. Nanking, there's a Catholic church, and there's a priest, and it's an orphanage for young girls. Okay, young Chinese girls. And when the Japanese came in, they started bombing. And this is the first time we see large-scale bombing from aircraft in warfare. Is in 1931, Japanese. Okay, now the priest is killed in a bombing, and this is loosely based on a true story. Okay, so the undertaker, played by Christian Bale, is sent to this Catholic church in Nanking to find the deceased priest and bury him, give him a proper burial. Okay, well, when he gets there to this church, it's got walls around it. There are all these little girls that are orphans. Okay, I would say they're 10 years old, roughly, in the movie they show this guy. And so he realizes, this undertaker, who's kind of like, he's a drinker, smoker, likes women type, he's a grifter character, you know what I mean? He's not like a holy man, this Christian Bale character. But then he realizes that if the Japanese come into this church, what's going to happen to these girls? And so without ruining the movie for you, okay, Christian Bale pretends to be the priest and tries to keep the Japanese out. Okay, War of the Flowers. And it's got a strange twist at the end, and it's really good, and it'll make you cry. I'm not going to ruin it. War of the Flowers. I'm giving you the title, guys. It's something you get for some free time. Write it down. Yeah. Yeah. I can't point that out to you. Oh wait, Sri Lanka's a country. It's over by India. In a minute. It's not in China. Okay. Yeah. One more movie? Yeah.
So what was the reason the Japanese were just taking over all these races?
Okay. Yes, build an empire. Now, these Japanese people believe that the emperor, Hirohito, is a descendant of the sun god. Okay? And they believe that they are superior. You know how the Nazis believe they're racially superior? The Japanese believe the same thing. They thought that the Japanese race was superior to all other races, certainly over other Asian races, but over everybody. And so they felt they were entitled to do this. And talk about a high level of brainwashing your population. The Japanese have done this. Okay, they were obedient. And I can get you some more stuff on this to kind of see where they're coming from about the fanaticism. They're well trained and they're brutal. Okay, their culture is this culture that we're talking about now is way different than our culture. Okay, as we'll see as we go through this, they feel like it's all based around honor. Okay. And honoring your family, honoring your country. And self-sacrifice in order to honor your family and your country is who they are at this time. Okay? And so they would much rather kill themselves than be captured by the enemy. Because it's dishonorable to be captured. And this is one of the reasons why they mistreated our prisoners of war so badly. Because they said these people are not worth living. They were captured, they're not worth living. Okay? Guys, tomorrow I'll wrap this up a little bit and talk about the test. So tomorrow's lecture will be pretty short. You can watch the video. I'll try and keep it under 15 minutes. Okay? Good? And I'll talk about the test, yes? Review sheets on Canvas. Good?